Colleagues, as I've indicated in my ruling earlier today, the Chair has offered the Leader of the Official Opposition the opportunity to make amends regarding the words he used last week, or else I would remove questions from him during question period today. Having not received such a commitment on his part, and the member having not withdrawn his comments, I will therefore remove 3 questions from the Leader of the Official Opposition in the opening round today. Collègue.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Oral questions. Questions orales. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, at least someone over there thinks about monetary policy. Mr. Speaker, who could be against the following motion? That, given that, after 9 years, the government has doubled housing costs, taxed food, punished work, unleashed crime, and is the most centralizing government in Canadian history, the House has lost confidence in the government and offers Canadians the option to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime.
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a very simple answer to his question as to who's opposed to that motion. Canadians.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. The Liberals have until October 29th to improve OAS for those aged 74 and under and to protect supply management. They need to pass Bill C-319 and Bill C-282. Why these 2 measures? Well, first of all, because it's good for Quebecers, but also there's consensus in this House. The Liberals, the Conservatives, and the NDP have already agreed to this. So why leave Quebecers waiting when we could make gains for Quebec? Will the government meet our demands for seniors and farmers? Yes or no? The Honourable Minister for Seniors. Mr. Speaker, the member for La Prairie is very, very behind when it comes to support for seniors. He voted against every measure that's been taken in this House, supported by members to help seniors, including the most vulnerable seniors in Canada. And I would like to know from the member for La Prairie, what does he say to the 6,200 people in his own riding who have joined the federal dental care program? What does he say to them when they ask him why he voted against that?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Months ago, I asked the government who could be against a motion pointing out that this government's doubled housing costs, taxed food, punished work, and unleashed crime, to give Canadians the chance to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. And she said, Canadians are against all of those things. If that's the case, then why won't she let them decide in a carbon tax election now?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a little sad that the Leader of the Opposition, having just lost a vote of non-confidence in the government yesterday, is putting forward the exact same motion today. I think it shows his desperation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
No, in fact, the motion specifically demonstrates that this government, this NDP Liberal government, has doubled housing costs. I found it interesting that the NDP has now discovered that they doubled housing costs. A second ago, a Montreal MP stood up to point to a young woman, Pascal, who can no longer afford to rent, much less to own, after housing costs have tripled in that city. When I was housing minister, rent was $700 in Montreal, and we built almost 200,000 units. Mr. Speaker, why can't the NDP put their actions where their words are and vote for a carbon tax? The
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
These slogans are clever, but they are empty, Mr. Speaker. It's empty rhetoric on the other side as always. In fact, he should take a look at the CMHC's report from today that puts a spotlight on Montreal, 106% increase in rental construction. Why is that, Mr. Speaker? Because GST has been waived by this government to ensure greater supply, to incent builders during a difficult time. He has no idea how to incent that sector. He's good at running around the country and insulting mayors, putting a spotlight on the homeless, but coming up with no ideas on that. It's more right-wing populism. They have nothing to say, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
In a carbon tax election, if that's true. Malheureusement,
Unfortunately, the Bloc Québécois is telling Quebecers, wait. If you can't pay your bills, just wait. If you can't buy a home, after 9 years of this Prime Minister, just hang on. If you're afraid of going out on the street because of crime that the Bloc Liberals have unleashed in our streets, in Quebec, a province that is at a breaking point because of immigration, they're just saying, hang on. Quebecers don't need to wait. They don't need to wait, Mr. Speaker. They need to choose a new government based on good common sense. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the priority of our government is to deliver for all Quebecers and all Canadians, Mr. Speaker. That includes daycare spaces, a dental care program, historic housing investments, Mr. Speaker. In the meantime, what are the Conservatives concentrated on? Well, as we saw in the Journal de Montréal this week, Conservative MPs are being paid to go to Florida to sermonize on the importance of banning abortion and teaching creationism. You can't invent that, Mr. Speaker. They should be ashamed.
Even though members are not recognized on the floor and they shouldn't be speaking on the floor, I always invite them to be very mindful of the accusations that they make to other members. The Honourable Member from Kenora.
Taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government. People across Northern Ontario are struggling to fill their gas tanks. Young professionals cannot find an affordable place to live, and our communities are less safe. Mr. Speaker, these are all reasons why Canadians deserve a carbon tax election where they can vote for our common sense plan. But the NDP continue to support this government, Mr. Speaker, denying Canadians that opportunity. Why is this Prime Minister so afraid of facing a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
They want to take away the rebate to Canadians. They'll have to explain that to Canadians, Mr. Speaker. What they'll also have to explain at some point, Mr. Speaker, is that they lost 800,000 affordable homes when they were in office. That minister, former Minister of Housing, who's now the Leader of the Opposition, went around, had no plan on housing, never mentioned homelessness once, and when it came time to vote in favor of ensuring zoning changes at the local level through federal dollars that would incent that change, he voted against. They all did. They don't care about those young people that the member just mentioned. They never cared. It's more right-wing populism, Mr. Speaker.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. The NDP leader made a big deal about tearing up the supply agreement with the Liberals and then flip-flop by voting to keep this Prime Minister in power. That's right. The NDP leader needs to end the costly coalition with the Liberals. People can't afford to eat. Ontario food banks just posted an 8-year high in usage. Canadians need a carbon tax election. Why is the Prime Minister so afraid to have one?
The Honourable Minister of Families, Children and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we all suffer when we know that there are fellow Canadians that are struggling. We've made historic investments as a government to ensure that our social security net is strong for Canadians. Whether that's in $10 a day childcare, Mr. Speaker, whether that's restoring the retirement age to 65, Mr. Speaker, but let's not pretend that the Conservatives really care about helping Canadians, because if they did, they would be supporting these important measures that are helping.
The Honourable Member from Sarnia, Lambton.
Well, here's what they've really done. This NDP Liberal coalition has doubled the debt, doubled housing costs, taxed food, punished work, and unleashed crime in our streets. So instead of selling out Canadians by keeping this Prime Minister in power, the NDP leader needs to vote with common sense Conservatives for a carbon tax election. Why not let Canadians decide whether they want to have the carbon tax hiked by 61 cents a litre by the Liberals, or whether they want a government that's going to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime.
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the question is, why are the Conservatives so desperate for an election right now? Because they want to make sure they get out before Canadians understand that they have a hidden agenda. But, Mr. Speaker, Canadians are much smarter than that. When the Conservatives say one thing and do another, Canadians know. We trust Canadians. When will Conservatives start trusting them?
The Honourable Member from Saskatoon West.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. The Saskatchewan Premier said the carbon tax is, quote, costing Saskatchewan's health and education systems nearly $380 million. That's money that could be used for more teachers, more doctors, and more nurses. This NDP Liberal carbon tax is literally taking away teachers and nurses from Saskatchewan. Shame on the NDP for supporting this tired Liberal government. Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister wants to cut teachers and nurses in Saskatchewan, why won't he call a carbon tax election and let Canadians decide?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I would encourage my Conservative colleagues to actually use facts. 8 out of 10 Canadians get more money back. It is an affordability measure. People who live on modest incomes actually benefit significantly. It's also an important way of fighting climate change. And if he wants to quote Scott Moe, I would say when Scott Moe appeared here in Ottawa and talked about the price on pollution, he said he looked at doing something else and everything else was too expensive. So he wasn't going to do anything to fight climate change. I guess that's the answer of the Conservative Party of Canada.
The Honourable Member from Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of Liberal government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, time is up, and now tariffs are up. With softwood lumber tariffs doubling to 14.5%. Well, what's happened? Today, the Resolute Forest Products announced the closure of the Forestry and Maniwaki, Quebec sawmills, costing 280 jobs because of the tariffs. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said this was a small issue. Can the Prime Minister explain why the loss of 280 jobs is a small issue, or is he just a soft Prime Minister?
The Honourable Minister for International Trade and Export Promotion.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the member that that the forestry sector and the workers, particularly in this sector, are tremendously important to our communities across the country. They are dedicated workers that give their all. But as as we have said, these punishing tariffs are unjustified. We've said this in the United States. In fact, indeed, I know that the United States care about building affordable homes just as we do, and these tariffs, if they were to get rid of them, will actually help us build affordable homes in this country and in the United States.
The Honourable Member from Bay of Quinte.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Canadian softwood lumber producers have already paid $9 billion more because of these excess tariffs since 2017. But you know what else they pay? The carbon tax. Right. The carbon tax costs hundreds of millions of dollars more, that makes it uncompetitive to the U.S. industry. But you know what else the irony is? This industry plants trees. Last year alone, they planted 440 million trees, while this government's $2 billion tree program barely got off the ground. Isn't it time for a new common sense minister who's going to axe the tax, stand up for Canadians, and fight for the 400,000 jobs in the forest sector?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Mr. Speaker, the question is yet another example of the Conservative Party not doing its homework and not learning the facts. As I say, on a residential basis, 8 out of 10 Canadians get more money back. It is an affordability measure and an effective way to fight climate change. In terms of the plant that he is talking about, it is based in Quebec, which has its own cap and trade system. They do not pay the price on pollution.
The Honourable Member from Oxford.
Of these NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, time is up, and now visits to Cambridge food banks are also up, nearly 20%. The Liberals' carbon tax scam has forced our seniors and our families to rely on food banks for their survival. The NDP continue to prop up their political masters and deny Canadians that carbon tax election they so desperately want. Why is the Prime Minister so afraid of a carbon tax election, and why won't he call one now?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the opportunity to talk about the childcare numbers that are up, Mr. Speaker. Just last week, we saw Comox Valley Schools announce a new childcare facility with 108 new spots for children there, Mr. Speaker. We also heard in Winnipeg, the Splash Childcare Centre, an additional 40 new spots for children. That's 248 new spots for kids here in our country. High quality, affordable care. That's what's up, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Langley Aldergrove.
After 9 years of the NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and now time is up. Yet the NDP leader and his colleagues voted yesterday to keep the Prime Minister in power so that he can quadruple the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre, the carbon tax that drives up the cost of everything and is driving a record number of British Columbians to food banks. Why is this Prime Minister so afraid of a carbon tax election? Why won't he let Canadians decide?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, what we saw is that the House voted non-confidence in the Leader of the Conservative Party of Canada.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, we can no longer wait after 9 years of this Prime Minister with the Liberal Bloc coalition. 72% of young people feel that they're less well off than the previous generation. The Liberal Bloc coalition is supporting a government that turns its back on young people. A government that, when are they going to build? Why not let them vote for a government that will build housing and fix the budget? Honourable Minister, thank you. Mr. Speaker, what's good for Quebecers, what's not good for Quebecers and including young ones, is the insults and petty partisanship that the Conservative leader does day in, day out. And he knocks investments that young Quebecers need. The Conservative leader not only calls everyone incompetent, but he also would rip up the deal we signed with the government of Quebec, $1.8 billion to build tens of thousands of affordable housing units in Quebec. All members on both sides, please order. The Honourable Member for Alfred Pellant. Mr. Speaker, our government has introduced a plan to build 25,000 new homes on federal Crown land by 2031. The Conservative leader and his housing plan would see federal buildings sold off to the highest builder with no guarantee of affordable housing. Can the Minister of Public Works explain to the people of Alfred Pellant how federal lands will be used to create affordable housing all across the country? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Mr. Speaker, let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It takes a second hand to count the number of units, affordable units, that were built under the Conservative leader's tenure as Minister responsible for housing. That is incompetence for you. We have created 8,000 affordable housing units all across Quebec. And so we don't need any lectures from Conservatives.
The Honourable Member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
9 years of this Liberal NDP soft on crime coalition, taxes up, costs up, crimes up, extortions up, crimes up. In Calgary, disturbing stories emerged of armed criminals committing extortions and kidnappings against families and businesses. This Liberal NDP coalition voted against Conservative Deputy Leader Bill C-381 to crack down on extortions. Instead, the coalition made it easier for criminals to get bail and reoffend. Why is the freedom of criminals more important to this government than protecting extortion victims?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, every single measure that we've made, including investing in police to combat guns and gang units, guess what, Mr. Speaker? Conservatives voted against and are against. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, when they were in power, they actually cut the CBSA, the RCMP, who did this very work, who worked with our provincial and municipal counterparts in policing. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to addressing crime, Conservatives are all about cuts and slogans, and we're about action.
The Honourable Member from Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, 9 years ago, we warned the government about joining the Beijing-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and so did the Obama-Biden administration. Last year, news about the Chinese Communist Party's infiltration of the bank forced the government to initiate a boycott and to begin a review. The boycott is now 15 months, and Canada still has its shares, and Beijing still has the nearly $250 million that this government gave the bank. So, when will the government release the review, dump the shares, and get the money back?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as soon as the Minister heard about these very serious allegations, she took action. The Minister announced an immediate halt, Mr. Speaker, to all Canadian government-led activity at the bank while we conducted a review of the allegations. In December, we announced an expansion of that review in partnership with some of our closest international partners. The Department of Finance continues to review the matter, as well as Canadians' participation in the organization. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very good. The Honourable Member from Sturgeon River Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, taxes are up, costs are up, crime's up, time's up. The Minister of Environment says he's proud of his preparations for the catastrophic Jasper wildfire, but 1/3 of Jasper was destroyed, $1 billion in damages, and 2,000 people are homeless. This isn't something to be proud of, and yet this is the record of failure that this NDP party supports. Banff, Lake Louise, and Jasper are still in danger. It's time for this minister to take responsibility for his failure so we can prepare for the next fire. Will he?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, this member should be ashamed of himself. They have deliberately taken out of context emails between Parks Canada officials who were debating which measures to use to fight fires as opposed to not fighting fires at all. One of those Parks Canada employees has received death threats.
Oh my God.
Since they've put this online, they should be ashamed of themselves, Mr. Speaker.
Oh my God.
The Honourable Member from Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, education is a provincial domain. Still, MPs would agree the safety of children is a concern for all Canadians. Does the government support Ontario's criticism of the abhorrent action of the Toronto District School Board using students as pawns for a foreign protest that hijacked learning about Indigenous peoples and their efforts to get clean water? Mr. Speaker, activist teachers on a TDSB-sanctioned field trip compromised the safety of children and violated the trust of parents. Will the government stand up to deceit and hatred?
Remind all members, please not take the floor where they're not recognized. The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's a question for the Ontario government. But on this side of the House, what we've been focused on is ensuring that every Indigenous child in this country has a fair chance to succeed in their educational journey. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, what we saw when we took office 10 years ago was a chronic underfunding of First Nations education systems, so that education rates were appalling across this country, leading to First Nations students not being able to reach their full potential. We've changed that, Mr. Speaker, and we're proud of that.
And so brings to an end another oral questions. I see that there are some members who are rising on a point of order. I recognize the Honourable Member from Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while we appreciate that you have acknowledged and ruled that the Leader of the Opposition was out of order last Thursday, we are confused by the mixed messaging that you've sent to this House. The member was out of order and yet has still been allowed to participate in debate, and today have 5 questions in question period. The regular practice is that a member isn't recognized to speak until they have withdrawn, and that is not being applied, and we have some concerns about the mixed messages. I'd also like to remind the Speaker of the very serious matter that was raised yesterday regarding the member for Fort Saskatchewan Sherwood Park. We are still waiting for him to withdraw and apologize for his homophobic and disgusting comment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, is rising on his feet, and I will recognize him in due turn. But I understand on the same point of order, so that the member doesn't have to get up twice. The honourable member, parliamentary secretary for the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I would just want to add a couple thoughts to it. We have to put into proper perspective when a member is requested by the Speaker's chair to withdraw the remarks. As it's been pointed out, they are required to do so. If they do not, speakers have not identified them until they do the apology. We can give ample examples of that. We cannot allow a second tier of a member of Parliament that he is allowed, or he or she is allowed, to violate the rules, and then it is the political party that pays the consequence. That's in fact what we saw here. There was the Conservative Party that lost the 3 questions. There was no penalty to the member from the leader of the Conservative Party. That causes a great deal of concern for all parliamentarians.
Before I move to the member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, because I can understand his motivation in wanting to stand up, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, as well as to the member from Edmonton Strathcona, the Speaker has made a ruling on this decision. I would encourage all members to read it very carefully. As you know, when there is something that contributes Article 18, the Speaker has some discretion as to what to do. And so the Speaker is certainly considered this question, has been in contact with, and had many discussions, and I would encourage the honourable members to read the session. If they wish to challenge the ruling of this chair, they know the procedure in which to provide. The honourable member. Then I see that the honourable member from Winnipeg's South Centre is rising on a point of order.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to draw your attention for the benefit of the House to some language I've heard used that I think is unbecoming of this House and of members in this House. And I have no interest in ascribing blame or pointing fingers, so I'm not going to name names, Mr. Speaker. However, there has been reference over the course of debate in the House in the past few days in particular to pagers exploding, walkie-talkies exploding, reference to perhaps members in this House themselves having that type of technology, which is an obvious reference to the conflict that is happening in the Middle East right now, Mr. Speaker. I heard another comment from a member today that, and I quote, "Did you get a thank you letter from Hezbollah?" This is to an Israeli member of this House who has lost loved ones, innocent loved ones in the conflict. We have other members of this chamber from all sides, Mr. Speaker, who have lost innocent people by virtue of the conflict that is taking place. I, again, am not interested in being partisan. I simply want to draw your attention to this and call upon the better angels in this House to conduct themselves on behalf of Canadians and one another with compassion and dignity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the honourable member for Winnipeg South Centre for a thoughtful intervention, and I'll take this opportunity to remind all members of the House that the most important thing that we can do, despite pursuing the interests of our constituents passionately and pointedly, but is to make sure that there is a fundamental respect between all members. This is a point that the chair has made, that chair occupants have made at several occasions. J'encourage tous les députés.
I would encourage all members to be nicer and more respectful of one another so that we can have debates that are passionate and interesting to represent the interests of constituents across the country.
On Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, my mistake, is rising on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to say briefly that, as members know, the NDP whip in particular has a history of making false and defamatory comments about me, and this is no exception. It's very clear.
Colleagues, if you please can keep your comments to yourself so that the chair can listen to this point of order being raised by the member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, who was referenced in some other point of orders. I think it is fair to allow him to raise his point of order uninterrupted to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There was an exchange yesterday in question period about extravagant spending by the government. $9 million spent on a luxury condo on Billionaires Row. Now, the leader of the opposition asked a question.
Speaker, I can't hear him. I can't hear him. I'm right beside him. I can't hear him.
False and defamatory comments have been made about me. If members want to hear a response, I'll provide a response. The leader of the opposition pointed out $9 million spent on this extravagant condo and identified a number of luxury features associated with that condo, including an extremely luxurious bathtub. Following that, the Prime Minister made no comment whatsoever about those features. Instead, the Prime Minister spoke about the kinds of international engagement that the government does. And as the Hansard clearly...
Colleagues, I'm going to ask the honourable member, please, if I'm going to ask... I'm going to ask the honourable member, please, to get to his point, because it's very important that we try to get to the point so that it's not perceived as engaging in debate. I'm trying to making sure.
Mr. Speaker, false and defamatory comments have been made about me. Yep. I'm providing a response, and hopefully members will benefit from reviewing the context of what happened. Yep. $9 million were spent on a luxury condo on Billionaires Row in New York. In a question from the Leader of the Opposition, various luxury...
Okay, colleagues, if the member has been... Colleagues. So I'm going to invite the honourable member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan. He was almost there. I'd ask him, please, just immediately get to the point so that we can address the allegations which were made against the honourable member, and then we can move on in the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we've heard a few words said in this House about bullying. I'm trying to provide an explanation with context and to answer false allegations that have been made against me, and I will persist in doing that. So following questions from the Leader of the Opposition about a $9 million luxury condo purchased by the government, and in particular identifying among the features of that condo a luxury bathtub, the Prime Minister ignored reference to those features and instead spoke about the engagement done by the government internationally. Right. And the Hansard shows the exchange, and many of the comments about made on Twitter about what was allegedly said don't reflect what's in the Hansard. The Hansard notes, does he engage with them in the bathtub? The point of that comment is to illustrate that, of course, meetings don't take place in a bathtub. A luxurious bathtub has nothing to do with meetings. The Prime Minister's answer had nothing to do with the questions, but it had nothing to do with sex. I wasn't thinking about sex at all. Never mind.
The honourable member from James Bay is rising on a point of order.
Speaker, I'll keep my remarks to a minute. I hope you'll let me finish. TA, we saw the tape. I've listened to the tape. What we didn't hear was an apology. So I just want to understand that the Speaker's saying that a Conservative member can make a homosexual slur against the Prime Minister of the country and it's okay and he can defend himself for good 10 minutes speaking. Is that the standard that we have in the House? We would like to know that that's the standard that this Speaker is bringing, because it very much clarifies where we go from here.
The Honourable, on point of order, I see that the Honourable member from Don Valley West is rising. I hope this will be I hope that this will be germane to the issue at hand, and then the chair will go back and consider this and come back to the House if necessary. The Honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, a point of order was raised. And I'm a little confused. So it's a true point of order because the member from Edmonton Strathcona has raised essentially a new point of order, but referred to yesterday's point of order. However, to be victimized once in this House is sufficient. To be re-victimized again by someone pretending, and we all heard it, and it is in Hansard, what was said. It is a homophobic slur. There were two of them, and they were both absolutely personal. And if the Consul General in New York were a woman, if she was treated that way in this House would be outraged.
Right on.
Every member of this House should be outraged because it was a homophobic slur, and I want you to take it into consideration.
Right on. Right on.
Colleagues, I think this is. I appreciate the points of view raised by the members. I appreciate the honourable member from getting up and offering his perspective. The chair is going to obviously take this matter under advisement.